there's a lot of criticism of the government. A lot of people have used the word capitulating to the real unions. Well, let's find out what Maxwell Marlow thinks. He's Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute. Maxwell, I just wonder, do you think this word capitulating is correct, is fair, when talking about the government's negotiations with Aslef?
I wouldn't say so, no, Peter. But what I would say is that this is actually reflective of what was voted in for. I mean, they offered a new deal for working people, so I wouldn't be surprised when they try and get one.
So this was in the manifesto, and we actually just got to say, actually, this is what Labour promised, therefore they've now delivered it, and, you know, suck it up and deal with it.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, we're looking at £9.8 billion worth of public sector pay rises, and then on top of that, giving it to rail unions. I mean, look, here's the thing. When it comes to these unions, and we're looking at the Aslef LNER dispute, I think it's separate, and I can understand that. However, I don't really think any excuse from the unions to continue to essentially extract more money from what is essentially a quasi-nationalised service, and I think taxpayers may end up coughing up quite a lot for this, and this is unplanned. I'm not sure what the tactics or the strategy is, but I mean, best of luck to Louise Haigh, to be honest.
Whatever it is, it's worked. And I mean, I want Aslef negotiating my next pay deal, it must be said. It's interesting, actually, Maxwell, because you talked there about the LNER strike. This is the separate strike because Labour, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, the sort of Deputy Chancellor, was crowing and saying, isn't this wonderful? We've dealt with Aslef. This is all over, nothing to do, nothing to see here. And then LNER, there's another dispute, and within sort of 24, 48 hours, there's another strike. Now, it's about different things, as you correctly say. It's about working conditions and all the rest of it. But clearly, there's just the net result for people using the trains, Joe and Joan public who are going on the train, is that they can't get a train, and actually they want the government to sort that out. But there's so many things. I read out the list there a minute ago of all the different disputes that they have. I mean, do you see this as Labour being pragmatic and actually clearing up the mess that the Conservatives left, the negotiations that were never actually dealt with, or are they just trying to get this out the door as quickly as possible before the budget, and then in the budget, tax rises we know are coming from Rachel Reeves?
I think it's the latter, to be honest. Look, Labour have, promised to, for example, bring train companies back into public ownership. However, that's only when their contracts expire, which are not for another few years. So I think these are essentially stopgap measures to try and get services back online. Now, is this the best way to reform the railways? No, absolutely not. We could be looking at a much more liberal reform of the railways vis-a-vis, for example, Italy or even Spain, who have much more liberal and I'd say better train services at better deals to commuters without having to go through complex negotiations and disruptive negotiations with unions, the government and train companies. Too many chefs in the kitchen as far as I'm concerned, Peter, and I think it could, backfire in 5 to 10 years, but let's see what happens. We can't know at this point.
What about pensioners? It's the largest welfare expense, £141 billion a year. And of course, pensioners have paid in, they've paid their stamp, they've done what they were asked to do. But you're saying perhaps that reform is needed there as well. What reform do you think will come, and what reform do you think should come and may not?
So I think when we look at the size of the welfare, I mean, I'll correct you, unfortunately, Peter, on they paid in, the payout. I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme at the end of the day. What you paid in 20 years ago was spent 20 years ago.
Exactly.
There's not much left. There's not much left afterwards, right? What we need to be looking at when it comes to pension reform, it needs to be sweeping. We need to be looking at a Swedish-style pension, state pension system, which gives pensioners the option to essentially invest in the same way a private pension does, except the state essentially backs it up. And they see much higher returns than the current state pension, with less obligations on current taxpayers. And they can essentially reinvest it in the economy, unlike the current system. Now, will we see that happening? It's unlikely. I think we could see in the next 3 to 4 years triple lock getting scrapped, because that's unsustainable. We're looking at over 7% increase on the current bill, which, as you said correctly, is in the hundreds of billions. That is totally unsustainable. And we did some research. We found that it could become, if things don't change, fiscally unsustainable by about 2030, 2035, which means that we're going to have more money leaving the system than is going in. And that's when you're in a real bind.
Yeah, and you need to find it else from somewhere else, maybe even borrowing.